So I covered on the main podcast a story, I guess, or an event that happened where a man, and it is this man pictured here, burnt a Quran, I believe, outside of the Turkish embassy, and then a man comes out and starts punching him and kicking him, and he has a knife in his hand, and I'm not sure if he actually used the knife in the video. I didn't see it. Not necessarily going to show it again because YouTube's a little bit funny about that sort of thing, but the video's out there if you want to see it. It's not especially graphic, but obviously don't go seeking out violence. It's not good for you to watch that sort of thing, but it is good to know from a political sense what's actually happened. So basically this guy was burning a Quran. Obviously he's not an Englishman, as you can tell, and there have been an unusual there's been a bit of unusual treatment, let's just say that, by the British state. And let's read this article from the Free Speech Union, and of course the fact the Free Speech Union have picked this up sort of is a bit of a spoiler about the direction I'm going to go with this, but they're attempting to establish contact apparently with Hamit Koskin, a 50-year-old man charged with religiously aggravated public order offences after he burnt a Quran outside the Turkish consulate in London. And you may remember in the video, a guy seems to come out of the actual consulate itself, as well as, that's the guy with the knife, as well as just a Deliveroo driver that happens to be going through, lands a little cheeky kick. Why these people don't have little, the equivalent of number plates on their bags, I do not know. Most of them are illegals. Not surprising, he sided with the guy trying to be violent, let's be honest. In fact, there was an instance, this is a bit of an aside, but useful all the same, where I tagged Deliveroo on X in a picture of a Deliveroo bag outside of a migrant hotel, and then they actually, I think one of their interns must have accidentally liked one of the posts rebutting it, and then when I actually went through again, they'd unliked it, clearly saying, hey, we just don't want to acknowledge that this is the thing. But all of these sorts of food delivery companies are doing it. But nevertheless, that's not what I'm talking about. And it says, the case has sparked fears that England and Wales are on the brink of reviving blasphemy laws by stealth, despite having formally abolished them in 2008. Of course, this ties in quite nicely to the recent attempts to talk about defining Islamophobia and to protect Islam against criticism, because, the political reason for the Labour Party is they, not only have contempt for ordinary white working British people and favour foreign invaders, but also their majority in certain areas with high Muslim populations is pretty slim, because they're siding with pretty much universally Islamic candidates. And what is going to happen is that is a lost cause for the Labour Party, but they're scrambling to be like, hey, we can still represent you. But of course, all of the woke stuff, Muslims don't tend to go for. And so if they have the opportunity to vote for an independent Islamic candidate or to have a specifically Islamic party, then they're going to take that over the Labour Party, which also sort of blends agendas that favour Islam and pushing Islam in Britain alongside, your garden variety leftism, which they don't actually care much for. They're not going to care about trans ideology other than, they want to keep their kids away from it, the same as many of us actually. And so it's a sort of political relationship of convenience, and so there's a massive incentive here for the Labour Party to signal that we're friends of Islam, we're going to do everything in our power, and they're going to go above and beyond to basically enforce Islamic theocracy, even though many of them are not Islamic themselves in the Labour Party. There we go. At best, Quislings, at worst, they're being cynical and malevolently inflicting this upon us. But it carries on to say that Mr. Koskin was arrested and charged on Saturday after footage circulated on X showing a man setting fire to a book outside the Turkish consulate in Knightsbridge. Moments later, a second man appears to attack him, repeatedly slashing at him with a knife and kicking him as he lay on the floor. Pretty much, although he wasn't really, he was just holding the knife rather than actually using it. And Mr. Coxon appeared at Westminster Magistrates Court on Saturday, where he pleaded not guilty. He was released on conditional bail ahead of his trial on the 28th of May. Again, another, Free Speech Union, you've got the date round the wrong way. It's the 28th of May, not May 28. 28 what? It is the 28th day of May. I'm going to point this out in every single article I read for time immemorial, by the way. This is the hill I die on. Sorry, another tangent. Meanwhile, the alleged assailant, Musa Kadri, I'm so glad these conflicts are going on, by the way, on the streets of London. 59, so it's a couple of people in their 50s, I think. Let's have a look. Yeah, a couple of 50-year-old men just having a fight on the streets of London. Has been charged with actual bodily harm. Weird that they add actual there. And possession of an offensive weapon. He was also granted bail and due in court on Monday. Like how the guy attacks someone holding a knife and they're like, yeah, go out, you're safe. I feel like if you violently attack someone, maybe it'd be a good idea not to release someone on bail. They're going to justify it by saying, well, he was so offended by the fact that a Quran was being burnt, he couldn't contain himself. This standard that doesn't apply to any other person, but we have to apply it to him. But anyway, the case has sparked widespread concern about the creeping criminalisation of religious offence in Britain. The Crown Prosecution Service is now pursuing legal action against a man whose actions, while deeply offensive to some, appear to have been a political protest rather than an attack on individual Muslims. Yeah, it shouldn't be illegal to do this. This is, we're not America. This is, the state is formally a Christian state. The king is the head of the church. There's no space for this. We don't have to protect any other religion other than Christianity, looking at our political system. So why do this? Obviously, I know why they're doing it, and I explained that at the start of the video, but there is no need to do this, right? We don't have to protect the rights of a foreign religion that seeks to subjugate us. And in fact, I think it should go the other way. If it were up to me, we would be persecuting it. Start by banning halal slaughter, ban cousin marriage. There are lots of things without having to specifically target the people themselves for their religious belief that makes it difficult. Get rid of, lots of welfare, because these people are here basically sponging off the state a lot of the time. We've seen the data, we've seen all of the data coming out of the state, and yes, we're paying for our own Islamisation. Wonderful, thank you very much. And it carries on to say, at the heart of the case is whether Mr. I keep on wanting to say Coxon for some reason, sort of Asianifying his name. Coxon, his actions fall under protected political expression or breach of public order laws, as long as it was his copy of the Quran and he's not damaging property. I don't see any harm done, and it was obviously intended as an expression of political protest, and the only reason the state would prosecute him is to curry favour with Islam. That's all it is. And I think if it does end up that he is charged, the judge has a name, let's remember it. And when time comes, let's extend the favour of, oh, hang on a minute, you were prosecuting people on behalf of Islam. Maybe you are a traitor to the country. Just food for thought. I'm not saying it should or shouldn't happen. I'm just throwing things out there. But anyway, under sections 4A and 5 of the Public Order Act of 1986, this one's a favourite of police, by the way. They use this one all the time. It's such a broad act that pretty much if anyone's behaving in any way that a police officer doesn't like, they can just appeal to the Public Order Act, and that's it. it's quite a blanket thing, even though, you know, if someone's shouting and throwing bottles in the street and things like that, that could be a public order offence, and that is something that I think people legitimately want stopped. But it's one of those cases where legislation is introduced and presented to the public with a specific intention, and that sort of intention is undermined by how it's actually applied in the legal system. And it carries on to say, it is an offence to use threatening, abusive, or insulting words or behaviour intended or likely to cause harassment, alarm, or distress. Wow, what a great country we are to have that written into law. Or we could also be not lame and just have thicker skin. You know, that's what we used to do. People used to be able to disagree with one another and criticise the most foundational of beliefs and not have the judiciary prosecute them. But hey, those were good times. We live in bad times. The charge is further aggravated under the Crime and Disorder Act of 1998, which applies if hostility towards a religious group was a motivating factor. Why can't you be hostile to a religious group? I'm sorry, but it's such an outdated law. You know, there are lots of things I don't like about certain things. If, say, a Papua New Guinean came over here, one of the cannibal tribesmen, and they killed and ate a person, and I said, well, part of the reason that they did this is because they had a religious belief that consuming a person gives them their power, and that maybe people with this religious belief, which is a prerequisite for what they did, maybe they shouldn't be here, then technically I'd be criticising their religion, which is a perfectly legitimate thing to do in that instance. And of course, the analogy is pretty thinly veiled here. I'm suggesting that in Islam, the propensity to violence is much greater because the Quran explicitly approves of it. They say that you should be violent towards unbelievers. It's in there, and you don't have to be a scholar to understand that because it spells it out pretty clearly and often. Hey, what do I know? I've only read it. However, legal experts and free speech advocates argue that burning a Quran outside an embassy, if intended as a political statement rather than an act of religious hostility, does not necessarily meet this threshold. You shouldn't have to argue legalistically to defend this sort of thing. We're not an Islamic country. We shouldn't have to enforce Islamic law. Who cares? You know, you don't have Buddhists coming and saying, oh, you know, I'm really offended by how you're disrespecting my religion by not having, you know, inner peace or something. You know, oh, you know, the Buddhists, oh, it's really, really offensive that you eat meat because some of them are vegetarian. They don't. It's specific religions, isn't it? It's specific people with specific beliefs causing specific problems. And yet we're always told that, oh, it's, you know, we're talking in the abstract. And one of the frustrating things about these debates is you don't talk about very specific things when it comes to this. And one of the ways in which the state can avoid criticism for its actions is that it keeps things abstract and general. It talks about religion in general, not Islam in general, because when you put things in as specific terms as possible, it sounds a lot worse. And when you get greater detail and something sounds worse, well, that's just a sign that maybe there is a problem. But hey, don't arrest me. This is just what I think. The European Court of Human Rights has previously ruled that political speech and symbolic expression, even when offensive, enjoys strong protection under Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights. Well, even the EU is supposedly, you know, able to protect us more than our own laws. Blimey. We've done something wrong. The CPS will need to demonstrate that Mr. Koskin's act was not just offensive, but also amounted to an unlawful public order offence. I think in today's climate, it's not going to be too hard. I don't think a judge is going to want to paint a target on their back. And at the end of the day, when people respond to non-violent actions that go against Islam with violence, I would argue that that is not a decision reached freely, and any decision like that is made under coercion. because they face the threat of violence. Everyone knows this, no one points it out. I would say any ruling in favour of Islam is under coercion and can be immediately, when a favourable political party, that is, which ain't going to happen, but if a sensible party took office, you could just say all of these were taken under, coercion, and therefore we get rid of all of them. They're not legitimate, and that has legal precedent. Although I'm not a lawyer, I think it's fair to say that laws passed under the threat of violence are not as legitimate as the ones that are passed, in perfect conditions, if you will. Former Minister Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary, has warned that the decision to prosecute Mr. Koskin's risks creating a de facto blasphemy law, which I think is fair to say that if the state starts prosecuting people on behalf of Islam, it's basically a blasphemy law. And we go further and further towards making Britain an Islamic country, which we don't need. No one wants it. I don't think any British person actually any normal British person wants Islam to take over here, because it will make our way of life impossible. And it says, with the Quran seemingly enjoying a special status above other religious texts, which is undoubtedly true, and it's because of violence, it's because of terrorism, because people are scared to stand up to it, because people fundamentally are cowards and don't say what they want, don't criticise things despite the consequences. And this is what happens. If you're a coward, your country gets taken over by a foreign religion and you will be replaced. And that's what's going to happen here. Writing on X, Mr. Jenrick acknowledged that burning a Torah scroll outside of a synagogue or a Quran outside of a mosque might meet the threshold for a public order offence, given the potential for incitement. Who cares? I don't care. Do those things, as far as I'm concerned. Obviously, don't break the law, because you'll get in trouble. But I think in an ideal world, these things should be fine. But he argued that burning a religious book as a political protest, in his case, allegedly against Turkey's policies, should not fall within the scope of the law. And they also talk more about what Jenrick is talking about. And then to see how this is going to develop, because hopefully the Free Speech Union can represent this guy. The FSU is now attempting to make contact with Mr. Koskin to assess whether he requires legal or advocacy support. This case raises fundamental questions about the state of free speech in Britain, particularly whether Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights, which guarantees freedom of expression, is being upheld in practice. I think ideally, as much as it goes against our uncodified constitutional practices, at least some ground rules that are hard-coded into our constitution would be good. Right to assembly, right to free speech, right to arms, please. That would be even better. Because having, these rules guaranteed, like, pretty please, we promise we aren't going to take away your free speech, is one thing. If we have the ability to make the government adhere to these rules, let's just say, then they have a bit more of a bite, don't they? And his case follows another recent prosecution in which a 47-year-old Manchester man pleaded guilty to a religiously aggravated public order offence after being filmed tearing pages from a Quran and setting them alight while holding an Israeli flag. Now, I think this guy is, I think this guy was actually an English guy, maybe. But anyway, the story of the guy in Manchester, I think it was, the police basically published his address. Why is this allowed to happen? That someone does something that could be a danger to their life as a political protest, and then the police assist Islam, basically. They say, this is terrible, we hate this, here's where he lives. We're not going to do anything if you come to get him, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Isn't it just siding with them? And the funny thing is, Muslims don't want the police on their side anyway. They don't see them as legitimate. They're not, they're not in keeping with Islamic law. They're a foreign police, so they don't care either. So they're being forced to cozy up to a people that don't even want them. That's the sad thing. But yes, I wanted to follow up on this because it's something to keep an eye on. It's a sort of canary in the coal mine, I guess, for the extent to which the government is going to push tyranny. And I think the sort of vanguard issue is going to be Islam, because the Labour Party is very keen to stay on its good side. And so anyone who opposes it, they're going to prosecute, more than likely. But yes, it's a bit of a grim story, I'm afraid. No happy angles to this, other than maybe in the long run, the threats to our values might actually strengthen our resolve in enforcing them. That's the only positive I can think of. But I think that there is actually a lot more truth to that. I don't want to end on a depressing note. I think that these sorts of things should make us realise that no freedoms are guaranteed, and actually, the cost of liberty is constant vigilance, and that's what we need to fight these sorts of things. But anyway, thank you for watching. Have a good day, and goodbye.